Hi guys, Ian Wright here. I'm a biologist and photographer, and I wanted to share with you guys an unboxing video of my brand new toy, a Nikon D7100. There's probably a lot of you guys out there, like I was, looking at YouTube videos of specs and trying to get an idea of a new camera purchase, and a lot of you guys are probably waiting for a Nikon D400, which hasn't shown up yet. I needed another camera body for a project, but also mostly a little bit of gear lust, hence the unboxing video. And the Nikon D7100 is refurbished right now on Adorama.com for $650. So I figured, you know what, I might as well pull the trigger, get a new piece of camera equipment, which will help me solve some photographic problems I'm hoping that I'm getting into. And I'll post some other videos and some photos of those problems and how I'm trying to solve them with this camera. That's what any new piece of camera equipment is. Lenses, bodies, etc. They're all tools to help you visually communicate your story. I can go through some of the specs. I've got a tear sheet of specs for this camera. I'm not going to go through every single one individually. There's spec sheets online. You can find these easily, and you probably know them if you're looking at these different cameras, especially obviously in the Nikon lineup. I'm a Nikon shooter, so I'll talk about Nikon options. But really, what I'll talk about more are how to use those specs for what I do, which is mostly wildlife and macro shooting, a little bit of people shooting, and some other things I'll get into. I've fielded a lot of questions about shooting macro with the Nikon system. A lot of macro shooters end up shooting Canon, in part because of a couple of pieces of equipment that the Canon lineup offers. The MP65E lens, for one, which is a bellows lens that allows you to get really close focus macro. There are some ways of doing that with the Nikon system, although it's a little bit more roundabout. And I'll talk about those, especially the specs of the D7100 that could help out with that, as well as with other wildlife shooting. So I'll talk about my thoughts on those after the unboxing, but let's open the goodies. So here I've got my box from Adorama. It's a little worse for wear. It was delayed a couple of days due to some bad weather we had on our way into Texas, but hopefully hopefully the contents are in good shape. So let's see what we got. New toys are always fun. All right, let's do that. I guess this was opened and inspected by the post office and then resealed back up, but we'll see how we do. All right, so order sheet from Adorama, always good. Thank you card. Ooh, free prints. All right. Okay, bubble wrap. Clear that out of the way, and ooh, a silver box. That's interesting. I was not expecting a silver box. All their new products come in gold boxes, but this is a reconditioned, a refurbished product. The Adorama refurbish system, they sort of offer some guarantees with this and mention that it is as good, if not better than new. In fact, it usually goes through more testing than new products. There is the comparable price range to this is the D7200, or the comparable spec range to this anyways, which is brand new. The thing that adds over a Nikon D7100 to me mostly is the big one is buffer capacity. This is pretty much crippled on buffer, and it's the biggest drawback to this camera. The D7200 also adds some video features, a few different video features and a couple other features I'll talk about that the 7100 doesn't have. But to me, for the price range for a refurbished 7100, the specs were much better than I was hoping for. I am coming from a Nikon D60, very old D60. I've added a battery grip here, but so pretty much any new specs are going to be much better than this now 4 or 5 generations old camera. So let's see what we have in the box. This looks like it's unsealed. Pop that away. Okay. All right. Good. We've got a sealed, let's see if you can see that, okay. Sealed software update, warranty, we've got an eyepiece cap, as well as the user manual, which, boy, that is a thick one, English and Spanish, but that's a fairly thick user manual. Make sure you download on any new camera, download a copy, a PDF copy of your user manual to your computer or to your smartphone or tablet. So when you're in the field and you have a question about how do I change this setting, or you're attending a workshop or something, you have it with you in case anything goes awry. Got a neck strap there, which is nice. All right, looks like this is a charging cord cable, USB to micro USB cable, the actual charging body for the ENEL15, I think it's ENEL15, maybe it's 15E, batteries, which are compatible also with the 7200, as I believe. I'll double check on that. And I think with the 7000. So a lot of good range out of that battery. Here is that battery. This is the Nikon ENEL15 battery. It's a sweet, nice little battery. Doesn't weigh too much. Okay, very nice. And we've got, okay, a wall mount plug adapter for the charger. All right, and then here is the big boy. Let's move that out. All right, no idea how to, oh, there we go. Okay, so we've got a personally sort of inspected, reconditioned product number with a 90-day Nikon limited warranty. I'll fill out this warranty card. I've got a serial number for it here, so that's cool. But this is exciting. This is basically a brand new camera, and just as good as new. Comes in a nice little bag here, and boy, this is, first looks at this is a really sweet camera. The condition on the actual camera body is very good. 0 scratches, it looks like. Very, very few nicks here and there. Boy, nothing actually on it. This is a basically brand spanking new camera for almost half the price of a new body, and certainly about half the price of the 7200, which again is not that huge of an improvement. Certainly not stepwise compared to what I'm coming from in a very early entry-level body for something like this. So, excellent. That is the D7100. I'm going to talk about a few of the specs here. One of the things that's exciting for me is getting to use video. I've never shot any DSLR video. The D7100 is not fantastic for that. The Canon lineup is really where you want to go if you're looking to really get into video shooting. Although I prefer the look, the build, some of the features of the Nikon bodies, as well as mostly just the image quality of a Nikon. They're just about as good as each other. You're set either way. Both have great lineups, but I'll talk about the Nikon system, which is what I know better, being a Nikon shooter, and some of the options you have for that. With this particular body, you have a mic port built in right onto the top of the hot shoe, which, as I understand it, is pretty darn good for video recording. Obviously, if I'm going to get really into it, I'll get a few other rigs and something like a shotgun mic, especially for wildlife, if you're doing directional and far off sound recording, or if you're doing something with interviews with people, you can get a clip-on mic, and you get into sound management, editing, and all that. But that's the way to go there. Boy, the ergonomics of the body, this feels pretty darn good in the hand. A lot of these videos, people are talking about hand holding in the grip. This grip has been a little bit redesigned. It is quite a deep grip. I'm sure I'll get used to it. Everybody says, boy, this is immediately comfortable. It is pretty darn comfortable. It's a little finicky down here, a little thin on the grip end. But yeah, that feels like that's going to be darn good in the hand. I will probably end up getting the Nikon battery grip for this. The serial number is escaping me on that. just to give it a little more beef and especially extra battery life. But that's one of the bigger things I'm excited about this camera, is a much longer battery life than what I currently have. Moving around the camera, we've got a flash button bracketed exposure, which is great. The D60 doesn't offer that, so I'm excited about that. A toggle switch for focus modes. Obviously the lens F-mount bracket there. We've got ports for your USB, HD, what is that one? Mic port, excellent. HDMI, so that's for your external mic if you want. HDMI out, headphones for your headphones if you're doing video recording, which is good. GPS if you end up getting the GPS 1 or whatever it is adapter that Nikon sells, or third-party ones. There's a couple other third-party ones. I have no idea why, even in the 7100, which was released a couple of years ago now, no idea why GPS isn't built into these cameras. It's built in your smartphone now. It's really frustrating. The GPS 1 adapter from Nikon is this big bulky thing that plugs in and then it goes in the hot shoe. But if you have a flash in the hot shoe or a video mic in the hot shoe, where do you gotta rubber band it or something to the lens? It's pretty annoying. Should be built into these cameras. I don't know what Nikon is thinking. Ditto Canon. I don't know the Canon lineup that well, but I don't think they have a GPS enabled camera, at least only in the brand newest ones. Ditto with Wi-Fi. This is Wi-Fi compatible with the WUA1 or whatever it is adapter. But again, don't know why that's not built into the camera. It's built into our smartphones, for God's sake. But the things I'm excited about having, I've never had a top LCD, which is pretty crazy. That's going to be a whole new learning system. Nice big 3.2 inch, something like million dot viewfinder, which is, maybe it's not that much. Nice. The viewfinder I'm excited about, 100% coverage on that. I'll talk about that in a second. Live view switch. Live view will come in handy. You've got your menu buttons, including this new I button that they've put on the 7200. Let's see. Dual card slot, 2 SD cards. That'll be nice for overflow or for copies, backup, what have you. Video button, you've got your metering, your exposure comp buttons, and 2 command dials, one at the front, one at the back. And even on this refurbished body, those feel like they turn pretty nice. Hot shoe cover. Hot shoe looks clean, basically unused, basically like brand new. Boy, that's pretty sweet. Okay, one of the last things to talk about the physical camera body is the dual dials with dual locking switches. A lot of people are really frustrated about this. Obviously, I'll figure it out, my feelings as I use it. The top dial seems simple enough to turn down and lock in. I rarely ever bump these dials, so yeah, I agree with people that, there's not a whole lot of point in having those. Especially this, oh boy, yeah, that secondary dial is a little finicky to press and touch, but you can do those independently, and for the most part, I will probably either be shooting in single or continuous high modes. If I'm shooting like a sporting event or something like that, I'll go into continuous high. Yeah, most of these other modes, I don't see much of a problem for taking your eye away from the viewfinder, which you are definitely going to have to do, and you're going to have to pull back. That's hard to do while you're in sort of shooting mode, but I feel like I will probably be locking these down and using that shooting mode sort of regardless. This top dial feels fine enough, just like, I can find that button real easily, so just as any normal camera. Auto exposure lock, you can reassign that to be a focus pre-focus button, I'm pretty darn sure. And yeah, that's about it for the physical look of the camera. It's fairly lightweight. The back is obviously a little heavier with the LCD there and the magnesium, sort of half magnesium casing. This is obviously going to be a lot better weather sealed than my D60, but it's not going to be quite as good as something like what the supposed D400 should have been, or certainly the D4s, the D800, that kind of quality. But it looks very robust to me, especially compared to my old D60 body here, which is reasonably sized. 7100 is a little bit bigger than that, but boy, this feels pretty lightweight. Obviously, I'll put with the battery in there, that'll weigh a little bit more, and if I end up getting the vertical grip, that'll be good to get 2 batteries in there, just to extend the life of the shooting. But boy, that's a pretty darn nice camera for 650 bucks. Refurbished, not even really used, refurbished off Adorama. Let me adjust you back to me, and I'll talk about some of the specs that I find interesting. So one of the things I fielded from a lot of folks doing macro work is talking about that Canon 65 lens that gets you up to 5x or 5 to 1 greater than life-size magnification. The only way to do that with a Nikon system is to use either, reversing a lens, using extension tubes, or a bellows system. There's no one lens that does it all for the Nikon system, except now there's a Venus 2 to 1 macro. There are a few third-party ones out there, but nothing quite as nice as that Canon lens. But in some other videos about macro methods of magnification, I can talk about, or look at Thomas Shahan's work and some other folks that do a lot of different ways, third-party sort of ways of coming up with that scale of magnification. One of the things I'm actually interested in is I've more than doubled my megapixel count. Megapixels definitely not everything. The more important thing for macro photography and for wildlife to a lesser extent is pixel density. Having this camera, my pixel density has more than doubled as well for the same sensor size. This is a smaller sensor, so the pixels are smaller and they cover per area. There's more pixels, a denser set of pixels per area than compared to some of the FX lineup, Nikon lineup, something like a D600, 610, or D800, D4, those type of cameras. What's nice about that for macro is you're really packing all those pixels right onto that surface area of your subject. You're sampling all the RGB, all the exposure from many more pixels sort of per square inch kind of thing than you would be with a full frame body. The drawback to that is the ISO noise performance is not great. The 7100 is probably not the camera for high noise. I'm excited because I can barely get above 4800 on my old camera. This has a native range up to 6400 and expandable up to 25.6, which is pretty darn good. I'm excited to use that, especially for night photography, star trails. I do a lot of that, and indoor events and things like that where you can be a little less conspicuous than using a big flash. That's certainly something to think about. But this is not the top ISO performer. You're talking there like the DF, or if you want to stay within the same price range, I would really think about going to a full frame camera, and then there's some other reasons to go full frame, although you have to change some of your lens lineup potentially. I'm coming from the perspective of probably what a lot of you guys are. I have a small bag, reasonable bag of gear already, some lenses in the Nikon system that work for a DX body. I like the DX having that little bit of crop factor to get you closer to wildlife, although again, biological knowledge, the ability to know your birds or know your whatever, knowing your subject, right, gets you that extra 100 millimeters or even more worth of, if compared to somebody just shooting a big long lens out of a car, say. If you really know your subject, you can get closer, and that's the way to really tell the story and visually communicate what's going on with your subject rather than just reach. That said, reach can help in that context. I don't rely on it as a crutch, but I use it as a tool when I want to hone in and focus on something and communicate. I will potentially be cropping some things down as far as some of the macro work goes, especially to help get me from, say, I can shoot about 2 or 3 to 1 with some of the macro equipment that I have, cropping down with a little bit higher pixel count. Yeah, right off the bat, that's going to be a little bit better image quality, but again, I really hesitate to rely on that. Cropping is not so much your friend, or not a tool you should rely on. per se. But I'm excited about the higher pixel density because of that. I'm excited about the higher ISO range. That's going to really help pop the stars in the Milky Way, say, for example, for night shooting, again, indoor shooting. Pixel density is great. I've got 2 SD card slots, better than 1. I will probably use them for just overflow storage, but that's just going to crank things up for more and more and more shots, especially if you take this out into the field like I do, like a lot of wildlife biologists do. If you're out camping for a good long weekend or something and don't have access to a computer to offload, there's various other things you can do about that, but this is just a good help there. 100% viewfinder frame coverage, that's huge for me. I'm dealing right now with a camera that's something like 91 or 2% coverage, and it sometimes matters, especially if you're really focused in tight, looking at your composition, which you should be. The best way to shoot composition is to really, that's one thing I haven't tried yet, is feeling how this feels right against my eye. That's pretty nice. I may end up changing the eye cup out for a circular eye cup or for something with a little more beef. These new eye cups compared to the older eye cups don't flange out as much and don't have a lot of soft rubber. This is the same on the Canon like 7D and 7D Mark II. Has a sort of blocky, pretty dense eyepiece, which I don't love. But that feels for now pretty solid. What you want to do is really pull that camera right into your eye and right onto your eye socket so that you can see every single thing, what's going on all around the edges. Do edge border patrol in your images when you're taking them. 100% viewfinder coverage will obviously help with that, where you know exactly what's going on in your image. You don't get any surprises like you do with some other bodies. Mirror lockup, that's going to be a nice feature that the D60 didn't have. Most cameras will have that now. That's useful when you lock up onto a tripod and you're still, or if you forget your tripod and you sit it on a bridge or a wall or something, just to knock off any extra vibration from the mirror moving. I've got 8,000th of a second shutter speed. That's my new top speed. That's double my old top speed. That can be pretty nice for something like a quick jet moving across you. I do a lot of airplane photography at air shows and things like that. 250th of a second sync speed. My old one had a 200th. Point being, just know what your shutter speed is, your sync shutter speed for when you're using flashes. I use a lot of flashes in studio when I'm doing studio work with insects. Or just regardless when I'm using studio flash, and you don't want to get that shutter bar that comes up with a curtain shutter when you're shooting above your flash sync speed. So just knowing what that maximum is. Speaking of flash sync speed, one thing I'm really excited about for this camera that my old camera didn't offer with the appropriate flash is auto FP high speed sync. And high speed sync, you can use your you could align the flash with the shutter where the flash will burst out flash instead of one big dump, and it will time it with the slit in the curtain going down the sensor. You lose more power as you're doing that, so you got to be pretty close with your flashes, but that allows you to use flash at a much higher shutter speed than the top sync speed, normal sync speed, 1/250th in this case. So that's going to be useful for where I want a really shallow depth of field, but I still want to use flash, something like opening up to f2.8 or f1.8, when I have certain things in the background I want to control, as well as allowing me to up that shutter speed but still add kind of a kiss of light for some wildlife work, especially with birds where you're trying to perk up colors and things like that. DX format camera. The high-speed shooting on this is 6 frames per second native. In the 1.3 crop mode, it goes up to 7 frames per second. Those are for full resolution raw, 14-bit raw images. A little bit, not so much faster, but bigger buffer if you shoot down into JPEG. Although this is the biggest, nick on this camera is the buffer rate and the refresh rate. This thing is not good. It'll shoot for about a second. From all indications. I haven't tried it yet, but that was one of the biggest qualms I had with getting this camera, and the reason I waited to get it when it was brand new. The 7200 has a much higher buffer capacity. You can shoot, I think, 100 raw shots with that. This one you can basically shoot 6 raw shots, and you have to wait a second or two, a couple of seconds, for it to fully refresh, which is frustrating when you're shooting a sporting event or something like that. Especially, I do a lot of, as I say, air shows or things where you're panning and trying to rattle off a bunch of shots. Wildlife work, especially when you have a bird preening or doing a display and you suddenly get a wing flap, you want to capture that behavior. A lot of times the only way to do that, your just reactions are too slow. The only time to do that is to predict that biology a little bit within a window, or an insect taking off. You look for the precursors of the biology going on, and then you rattle off a few shots. So my shooting style is going to be, though, just the same as what I'm currently using, which is a 3 frame per second and about a 1 second buffer on my old camera. So I'll be, I'm sure, more than happy with that buffer rate. If you really need it for something like sports, you really do need, 6 seconds plus of ripping off frames, hundreds and hundreds of frames to get that one shot. I'll just end up being, as I normally do, sort of sniper mode, where you're just either shooting single shots or really targeting that burst of shots to try to cover the range, which is, maybe you learn the biology better, who knows. But the 1.3x crop mode is another thing I'm pretty excited about. Again, all that really does is just digitally kind of crops the image. It doesn't expand the viewfinder. It doesn't. It's just, drops down your image size. You get, I think, about a 15 megapixel image that's a little more cropped in, and it's just like pressing zoom on your playback function or something like that. But again, with that pixel density, I think this will give great quality images at even in that 1.3x crop mode, and there you get things a little bit faster. It's going to be a pain in the butt if you're trying to use like a wide angle lens really fast for maybe stitching shots or doing action sports kind of stuff, where a wide angle lens is really cool look. But again, at least 6-7 frames per second, I think that's manageable, certainly compared to what I have. Exposure bracketing, the D60 doesn't do exposure bracketing. That's really nice for doing handheld HDRs, or for composting images to do blurring water, especially in bright sunlight, where you can't get back, even with density filters, you just kind of can't get back that much stop. Or for doing something, say you're at a tourist location and there's lots of people moving around, but you want a clean shot of the background, you can bracket off a number of frames as people are moving and clone them out in Photoshop, align everything. Obviously, most of that will still be done on a tripod, and it doesn't so much matter, but just having that bracketing function rather than having to adjust the exposure every time is going to be nice. Again, the ISO sensitivity is going to be huge for me, big step up, but again, you're not right at the cream of the crop with this camera, especially in the shadow areas. The highlights are going to be okay. It looks like the shadow areas, you get some banding potentially with this camera, and obviously ISO is going to be more pronounced, more noticeable in the shadow areas of a photograph. So I'm going to have to figure out whether I still want to keep my normal underexposure settings, which I usually underexpose by about 1/3, to pop the colors, to pop the blacks, use color contrast, trick the eye into thinking you have a sharp, contrasty image. You can underexpose a little bit. I'll see how that affects the quality on this camera. One of the biggest things I'm excited about is a higher dynamic range native in this camera to pick up those shadows and those lowlights. The D7200 and some of the others have this flat landscape picture setting, which the 7100 doesn't have, so I won't be able to play with that, but that's an option to think about, especially if you do a lot of landscape or a lot of contrasty work. Let's see what other specs. Detection range on the AF sensor, the autofocus, is huge.